America, we got to get back to doing what's expected of us as free citizens in this democracy. That means being tolerant, being respectful, staying informed, and being engaged. I'm former Congressman Joe Walsh. Follow me here and join the millions of Americans who are renewing their social contract with each other. The social contract, it's on us.
It takes time. I do this. Michael Cohen and I do one of these every Wednesday afternoon, and we sit there waiting. When are we going to be live? When are we going to live?
I'll tell you, Brian, Substack's growing by leaps and bounds.
It really is.
But they got to get their technological act together.
That's right. You know, we talk about this every week, Michael and I, because I actually, you're the first person to get my upgrade. I bought a little stand for my phone. I've been propping it up against the laptop.
Cool.
You know, it's
hey, everybody.
Hey,
welcome. Come on in. Press those red hearts.
right?
Michael Cohen tells me it does something to something. Press those red hearts. We're in for a fun, interesting conversation tonight with a good friend who's also a really smart fucking political mind. And that's why I've asked him to join me. Brian, welcome.
Joe, it's my pleasure. It's always, I've said this on Twitter and on here. There's nobody who likes a good, well-placed expletive as much as I do.
I'm right behind you. You are the best. For everybody coming in, come on in on wherever you are in the country. Where I am in Washington, D.C., it's cold. Where Brian is in Pennsylvania, Philly, outside of Philly, it's cold. Brian Rosenwald, by the way, is a political and media historian at the University of Pennsylvania. A really smart, great guy. Brian, before we start, senior editor of Made by History at Time Magazine. That's still a thing?
Yeah, it is. We 8 years now. We publish a couple of pieces a week, bringing the best historians to everyone. And
awesome.
You know, we need history more than ever in this moment.
Start there. By the way, everybody, as you come in, press the red hearts. Thank you for joining us this Tuesday night. My guest is a really smart guy when it comes to history and politics. He's at the University of Pennsylvania. He's a political and media historian. There's so much I want to ask Brian about this moment, the Democratic Party. But start with what you just said, Brian. This is such an important moment for history. Explain yourself.
Because so much of what we've seen is not new. As much, you know, history never completely echoes, but it rhymes. It is the way that I would put it. You know, give a couple examples. Everybody acts like Trump is sui generis, like he's something unique, but he's not. We had a guy like him before. His name was George Wallace, and had the same kind of conservative populism, gained popularity. The only difference is he never got to actually take over one of the parties. He just ran as a third party guy. And so, you know, you can learn things from that. Or to give you another example.
Stop. Love you, brother. I'm going to push back.
Okay.
So I don't think we've ever had a Trump, but even if you use Wallace and disagree with me, Brian, I think Donald Trump is everything our founders feared.
That was my next point. You cut me off before I said that.
I don't think we've ever had a president who's everything our founders feared. Go.
The only one that you could say was close to Trump might be Andrew Jackson or Andrew Johnson in the 19th century. Jackson was a demagogue. He, as a general, broke the law and did what he wanted. And you know, really had some of the kind of Trumpian behaviors. And Johnson just ignored Congress when he felt like it. So you know. But we've never had a modern president like him. And you're 100% right. You know, Wallace got, I think it was 13%, 14% was what he got in 1968. You know, he never got to that level. But in terms of the politics and the type, I show my students every year video of Wallace and say, does that remind you of anyone? And like, well, that's Trump.
Right. Educate me. Like, I think Trump is utterly horrible. I think he's a psychopath. I think he's irredeemable. but I don't think he's an ideologue. I think he's kind of
No.
like a vehicle. Wallace was an ideologue, right? Or not?
Well,
Maybe not.
maybe not. You know, there's stories about Wallace in the 1950s where he was kind of a racial moderate in Alabama, and then he loses the governor's race, and people say he said it's never been proven. They said I'm never going to be out expletive, racial expletive again.
Yeah.
Um, and then he becomes Mr. Segregation, and then by the end of his time in office in the 80s, he's singing Kumbaya with John Lewis, and trying to atone. And the interesting thing about Wallace, first of all, is he was horribly corrupt. Kickbacks for everything. You
Mhm.
don't pay up, you're not getting it. But he really wasn't there wasn't an ideology beyond advancing himself. It was conservative populism, but it was let me give you what you want. We could spend more on
Yeah.
roads and teachers and things like that while we rail against the pointy-headed, bureaucrats and
But
stuff.
what's so cool, this is part of why I love talking to you, because you and I, in many ways, think alike, but in many ways we don't, and we're in very different arenas. So I go on my show or I go on TV every day and I say, that guy's a tyrant. He's the very thing our founders feared. He's a fascist in the political world, and I believe those things. But you are a historian, and I'm really intrigued by the notion, like, to me, Trump is unique in our history. You say, is it fair to say that you would say kind of unique? Oh,
Yeah,
I'm talking about American presidents.
yeah,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
no, among presidents, he's fairly unique. I think that you can take a little of this guy, a little of that guy. But you're right. First of all, he's got no ideology whatsoever. There's
Yeah.
no he has no real beliefs about well, I think I did I can't take credit for this, but I did an event with Sean Trendy last year where he said he believes in three things: tariffs, immigration restriction, and Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And that's not in that order. So
Yeah.
he really doesn't have beliefs. It's interesting. Anybody who's actually like around him, I think there's a sly humor of like this is all an act. He's playing a character in a lot of ways, but the boorishness, the fact that he knows nothing about policy. I mean, floating 50-year mortgages last night, not seeming to understand basic real estate stuff, even though he was a developer for how many decades.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and it's weird. I always caution people use the word fascist, and
I
I
know. I
always
know.
caution people because I'm very torn on this. On the one hand,
Oh,
he's doing everything that a lot of fascists did. On the
yes.
other hand, most fascists have beliefs, and he has none. A lot of this is just that he thinks he can run the US government the way he ran the Trump Corporation. And the founders were terrified of somebody like that who thought that everyone would just do what they say. You know,
That's a great point, Brian, because he doesn't every fascist in history has had those beliefs.
Yeah, they've had some sort of belief system or something, and he's just and I don't even think he wants to be a dictator per se. He's too lazy and disinterested for
I
that.
was gonna ask you that, though. That's interesting. I was gonna ask you, but wouldn't it be safe to say that a belief of his is to be a strong man, to be an authoritarian?
Well, yes and no. Like what I'm saying is I don't think he aspires to that. I just
Mm,
think he doesn't he thinks he's president, therefore he should be able to do whatever he wants. Like he doesn't I think I guess what I'm saying is that it's more born out of ignorance and not understanding the system and why it is the way it is and how it is the way it is and coming from decades of no one ever saying no to him. I
yeah.
don't think, I'm only, I'm not trying to defend the guy. I think he's the worst
No.
thing ever. He's by far the worst president, and he's, worse than that. But I just think a lot of this is about, ignorance of like that we're a nation of laws, not a nation of men. We are not a nation where he can just do whatever the hell he wants, and he thinks he can.
Do you think he believes in that idiotic brain of his that he is above the law?
Yeah, on some level. I mean, I don't even think he knows where the legal lines are, but I
Mm,
think he basically believes, first of all, that he can get away with it, which is true, because Republicans, the way the system was set up, people were supposed to put the country above party,
yeah.
above their own interests. You go back to Howard Baker's the great paradigm, the great senator from Tennessee
Yeah.
who first helped bring down Richard Nixon, even though he was a Republican, and then sacrificed his presidential ambitions to help pass the Panama Canal treaties.
Yeah.
Like that's what the founders wanted, and now we've got Donald Trump and Mike Johnson and John Thune, who honestly, I don't think there's anything Mike Johnson would push back against ever. He's one of the weakest people I've ever seen.
And again, we're going to move off of Trump in a moment. I'm just, when I've got you, I always want to pick your historical brain. When it comes to corruption, public corruption, a president using his office to enrich himself, is Trump one of one, or is Trump in the starting five somewhere when it comes to American presidents?
I think he's one of one among presidents. I mean, we've had scandals, we've had corruption, but he's the first guy who flat out is just like, I'm going to get wealthy off this. I'm going to have a crypto, thing. I'm going to, spend money at my own properties. I mean, every weekend we're paying for Secret Service to use Mar-a-Lago or Bedminster and putting money in his pocket. His son-in-law's gotten wealthy. His sons have gotten wealthy. He is, from a corruption standpoint, I don't think there's anyone that
And
really matches him.
Brian, it's interesting because I get asked this 1,000 times every day. Joe, why aren't people stopping his open acts of corruption? He's enriching himself. Isn't he breaking laws? Blah, blah, blah. And I go back to, Brian, the system, it's corrupt, but how do you hold him accountable for this? That's impeachment, right? There's no way to.
There,
Oh,
there's there's a essential flaw in the system, which is
boom, boom.
that just because you break law, first of all, we have a Supreme Court justice, I think it was Barrett who wrote, and she's not even the worst, that, sometimes just because the law is broken doesn't mean there's a way to enforce it, that there's a
Yeah,
mechanism to enforce it.
yeah,
And then, the founders, first of all, remember when they designed the system, and I agree with you wholeheartedly, when they came up with the electoral college, the idea was that you'd have wise electors who
yeah,
said no to someone like Donald Trump. That's why it wasn't just a self-executing system. They feared him. He is the fits to a T of what they feared.
yes.
But in creating this system, they could never have imagined that you'd have a Congress that cares more about party than they do about protecting their own power. They thought their self-interest would counterbalance the executive self-interest, and the judiciary self-interest, would counterbalance the executive self-interest. And realistically speaking, rulings of judges are not self-executing.
Yeah.
And once the Supreme Court let him off on so many things with the indictments and stuff like that, but there's another entity that deserves blame, and that unfortunately is the American people. People
Yeah.
like you and I were out there in 2024 screaming from the heavens, this guy is bad. This guy is going to be worse the second time around. I actually had a friend who's apologized to me for getting it wrong because I said, the second time around he's learned. He's going to surround himself only with yes people who are going to do exactly what he says. And a lot of what stopped him the first time around was people who just ignored him when he said something insane, or illegal, and that's not going to be there. And we screamed it from the mountaintops, and what we found is most people are willing to countenance, risking democracy and risking the rule of law if they think it's going to be better for themselves economically, and that's really what this came down to.
I say often, Brian, what we're seeing right now is this is what America looks like without a Congress, without an independent legislative branch.
Yeah.
We don't have an independent Congress right now. Respond to that.
No, we don't. I mean, the House has been in session, I believe, 20 days since the 4th of July. Now, I don't
And
know
they
about you,
work for
Joe.
Trump. They work for Trump.
They
Mike
they work for
Johnson.
Trump.
Yeah.
I mean, Mike Johnson is as weak a leader. First of all, Mike Johnson, the minute Donald Trump wants him gone, is no longer speaker.
Yeah.
Secondly, he will not cross Donald Trump because, like, he can't get the votes on anything without Donald Trump leaning on people. He is a guy, he's an accidental speaker. He's as weak. I mean, this is the
Yeah.
furthest thing from Tip O'Neill that you're ever going to find, or somebody, Sam Rayburn, a strong speaker. And most of these guys care only about primaries, and Donald Trump is the hero to their primary voters. And they're almost, a huge percentage have turned over since the early Trump days. These are people who have no memory of politics without Trump, and they just, they don't care. It's like these Democrats are deluding themselves, thinking, oh, we've got Republican senators who will negotiate with us on health care. Okay. And you know what's going to happen? You're not getting 60 votes or a House vote without Donald Trump's sign off.
Yeah. Yeah.
He controls the Republican Party lock, stock, and barrel. and they do as he says.
Two two final ones on the notion of Trump in the presidency. Yes, he's everything the founders feared. Yes, he's a tyrant. Yes, I believe he's a fascist. But Brian, historically, this is a long time coming, right? For years and decades, the legislative branch has ceded their authority to a president. If our founders all woke up today, they could not fathom that that office has as much power as it has, correct?
Yes, and I mean, that you can take it back to FDR in the 30s at the
Yeah.
beginning of the expansion of executive power. You can take it back to Teddy Roosevelt and the beginning of the modern presidency, where the president became a leading political actor, as opposed to like an executor of things.
Yeah.
But, it goes back, and I think that the biggest problem was in the 70s, Congress woke up and realized they had a problem.
Mm.
They said, hey, maybe we shouldn't be giving the president so much power because look at what Richard Nixon did with it. And then you have two forces that have happened since then. Well, three forces. Force one is you had a cadre of Republicans, including Dick Cheney's the one who's probably most well known, who said, we need to get the power back to the executive. We've weakened the office, irreparably. This is bad. And I think that Cheney was responsible. Iran Contra is the example of they did something that Congress explicitly prohibited, and no one really ended up paying a price for that at the end
Hmm.
of the day. And the message was, hey, you can probably get away with this as long as your party backs you.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of reasons for that. I did like a 2-hour interview on Watergate with somebody once for CBS and went through this kind of thing. But that's one piece. The second piece is polarization. There are people in Congress who would have been unimaginable even a generation ago. So Tommy Tuberville is my favorite example because he's just an idiot. He's a flat out idiot, and he beat a good senator in Doug Jones. And the issue is when you're that polarized, it doesn't matter who you have up there for your party, you vote for them. So
Yeah.
there's no incentive to be independent at all. There's nothing to exert yourself, assert yourself in any way, shape, or form. That's kind of the second piece. And the other thing I have to bring it up is your former profession, the conservative talk radio hosts who have pushed people
Yes.
to want more and more extreme things. I wrote a book on this called Talk Radio's America. Donald Trump sounds like most hosts a lot of the
Yeah.
times.
Yeah.
And that's what the Republican base wanted. So that, that's the second piece. And the third piece of this is Congress doesn't work, Joe.
No.
And I'm not talking
Yeah.
about working hard. I'm talking about part of what presidents are doing, and this is, I'm not defending Donald Trump in any way because he's broken laws left and right. But you go back to George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Joe Biden. The reason they are stretching the bounds of executive power is that Congress doesn't function. In a polarized legislature, the filibuster creates real problems because we have candidates who run on things, right? And then you get a trifecta, and people expect you to deliver. And you can't because Congress can't do anything. They don't
Yeah.
accomplish anything. They can't address our national problems. So what happens is you have a president who people are saying, you're not doing anything. You're not delivering. So do something about it. And so they say they have somebody on their staff say, well, sir, we can stretch this law and do this. And they start stretching the bounds of executive power and more and more and more incrementally. And then you get to a point where you have a Congress that doesn't remember Congress ever asserting itself,
Yeah.
in opposition to a president or doing something about any of it, certainly not on a bipartisan basis. And there's no muscle memory for that. So they've just kind of rolled over. And this is just really bad. And I know people don't care about this kind of thing. I
Oh,
know that for your viewers out there and for other people, they're saying, okay, fine, but if it's better for me, if I could put food on the table and I couldn't otherwise, this is all, it's nice to care about this, but it's a luxury. But I would say that it's not because if you don't have a functional legislature and you don't have balance of power, it can go wrong really quickly too. And we may be headed there because Donald Trump's an economic moron.
yeah.
These tariffs and things are a disaster for us economically.
And Brian, I'm with you. Look, I will take this to my grave, and if I ever run for office again, I will exhibit it. If you're a candidate for office and you can't fucking make the case to the American people that democracy matters, that Congress matters, and Congress should do their job, and that's every bit as important as the price of eggs and the price of beef. If you can't fucking make people care about that, don't run for office.
That's
People
exactly
should care
right.
about both.
And that's actually another good point. Jared Golden just announced his retirement, congressman
Yeah.
from Maine. And it's really bad because he's a serious legislator. And we don't have enough of those. And what did he say? He said, it's not worth having to sit in a hotel on Thanksgiving last year because of threats to my family when this institution accomplishes nothing. We don't do anything. We don't legislate. We don't, what's the point? It just then it becomes a self-perpetuating cycle because you get these self-aggrandizing people who just want to get attention. I mean, Nancy Mace being the best example this week of, and I probably shouldn't pick on her because she may, fit in the DSM somewhere.
Yeah.
But you have these people who'd much rather get on TV and much rather be able to go home to their fundraisers and things, and it's just a disaster, and it goes back far. I don't know if you remember Bob
Huh.
Inglis,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
congressman, South Carolina. He was a
Yeah.
congressman in the 90s, and he was at the leading edge of Gingrich revolutionary, and he had
Yeah.
like 8 years out of office. And he said, I made a promise to myself that when I came back, I wasn't going to hate the other side. It wasn't good for my own soul, if anything else. And he runs again, and he ends up losing one of the worst primary defeats in history. And
Yeah.
the reason for that, I interviewed him for my book. He said the reason for that is I went in and told people, I said, Barack Obama is a good, God-fearing American who's a patriot, who loves his country, and I disagree with him on everything, but he's a good man. And they said, get out of here. We don't want you. You can't acknowledge that about the other side. Primary voters in South Carolina, he lost like 73 to 27 or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Remember that well. So that begs the question then, my friend, chicken egg, what's to blame? Like, yes, social media incentivizes us to reward the extremes. Our primary system, the two political parties, all push the extremes and polarize us. But at the end of the day, Bri, this is up to the fucking American people to get off their ass and do something about it.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I think we need ranked choice voting everywhere. You look in Alaska, you got maybe the most moderate senator because she can win on ranked choice voting because the Democrats can make her their second choice. In Lisa Murkowski. I think that we need to engage people who disagree with us and try to, understand that they are not the enemy necessarily. And it's hard in a Trump era. It really is because you look at
Yeah.
some of these people and you say, how dare you do this to American democracy? But I think that, geographic polarization is a huge problem. I think that we need some common sense reforms. We need to expand the House, for example. It's
Yeah,
long
that's
overdue,
right.
and that will help avoid the accidental president like Trump in 2016 because the Electoral College, the Senate bonus for each state,
Yeah.
two
Yeah.
electoral votes, that goes away. You need things like that. And people also, first of all, they need to consume perspectives across the spectrum, and they need to focus on reading journalism and getting journalism, not screaming heads. And I'll tell you, I see it on my own Substack, the World According to Brian, for anyone out there who wants to subscribe. The more fiery my videos are or the title on them are, the more clicks I get.
Totally.
And that isn't good for America. You want good, serious conversation and nuance. And there's no reward for that in our media ecosystem.
No, and it's going to take, look, as when I stood up in the public square against Trump 7.5 years ago and said I oppose that, I thought others would follow. They didn't. But to your problem right now, Brian, it's going to take a few courageous people to lead on this because I do think there's an audience out there for opposing the yelling from both sides. I do think there's an audience. It's going to take some bigger voices to plant their flag there, I think.
Yeah, and I also think, Joe, we have to look back to what I think is the most salient number from the 2024 election, which is the giant split over people who got their news from news sources and
Mhm.
voted in every election, both of whom favored Harris by a lot, and
Yeah.
people who got their news from social media and or only vote in presidential elections, i.e., those people pay no attention to day-to-day politics. They favored Trump by a lot. That we are being led into a cul-de-sac by the people who don't pay attention and don't know what's going on. And just, this is how they came up with this idea. Donald Trump was an economic genius because he was a businessman. And I always go back to the line that my favorite comic, Lewis Black, tossed out when I saw him doing stand-up. He said, this man fucking bankrupted a casino. That's
Yeah.
impossible. The
It's
house always
impossible.
wins. That's
Yeah.
the thing. And I mean, it's
What
that's the problem.
what and then I want to move to the Democratic Party. But Brian, last question on this. I don't think our founders anticipated what Trump is. My question to you, my historian, is, and they gave us an unbelievable system. But my question is, are there things systemically we need to do to prevent the next Trump, to prevent another Trump?
I think that we have to strengthen our institutions. First of all, we need if we need an amendment for this, no presidential immunity. You break the law while in office, there have to be consequences. The second thing is we've got to think about primary elections. They are not functioning in the way that they're supposed to. They are giving us the most extreme people, and that's a
How do you
problem
stop?
because
Okay, what do you do? What do you do to him?
I do think ranked choice is probably the best solution, but I'd be lying if I said I knew for sure because
Mhm.
primaries were considered a democratizing reform when they were
Yeah,
enacted
right.
in the early 19th century, and they're just not working now, especially because 12% of people show up in primaries, and it's the most
Yeah,
extreme 12%, and that's where you're getting it. I think that we need to do something about the filibuster. I actually came up with a set of reforms just this very afternoon as to what I think would be the ultimate package. Because I started thinking about this idea that people were saying, Democrats were never going to win the shutdown because
yeah,
you can't, give in to hostage taking. So here's what I would do. I would get rid of budget reconciliation. Because what that does is it gives them a partisan way to pass your whole agenda
yeah.
without engaging the other party or a lot of your agenda, and it reduces the incentive to try to compromise. Then I bring back the talking filibuster. People don't understand that
Right.
before the modern era, the filibuster was something that happened once a year at most. It was a rarity. I could show you charts of cloture votes, that I showed students when I taught Introduction to American Politics, where this is something that was hit on two guys, James Allen from Alabama and Jesse Helms from North Carolina, two conservatives, one a Republican, one a Democrat. In the 70s, realized we can tie this institution in knots, and Howard Metzenbaum, a liberal from Ohio, also figured this out to get what we want. And from there, we got to this point that all of a sudden you need 60 votes on everything, and that
Right.
doesn't work. If you
No.
have to stand on the floor and you have to hold it for days, weeks on end, and you impede everything else, that would disincentivize this 60 votes on everything thing. And then I might bring cloture down to either 55 or 57, or say you need three or four of the opposite party. Because 60 is a big number when we're this polarized
Oh,
and nobody gets
huge.
majorities like
Yeah.
that. And I think that you need a functional Congress so people stop looking for a strong man to solve their problems. I
Do
think that
they,
that's
Brian? I agree with a lot of that stuff. Two quickies. Do You're younger than I am. Will we ever break up in America this two-party duopoly? Is that
probably
just
not.
impossible? Okay.
I could see a party getting replaced by another party like the Republicans replaced the Whigs in the 19th century, but the problem is anytime you have three parties, there becomes a risk, and whichever way an independent leans, somebody who's inclined towards that third party, they lean one way or another. And they worry when you're trying to get a new party off the ground
Yeah.
of, am I going to cost the side I like more
Right.
the
Right.
election and elect the guy I like the least? The best example right now, and I've warned Democrats about this, guy named Mike Dugan, who's the mayor of Detroit or
Yeah.
outgoing mayor of Detroit running for governor in Michigan.
Michigan.
And he's saying, we got to break up the duopoly. And I don't necessarily disagree with him. But the problem is, let's say you have 60% of the Michigan vote in a Democratic wave that leans left versus right. If you split that 60%, say
Yeah.
35-25, now all of a sudden the Republican, John James, can win with 40%, even though he's the guy who would have been the third choice for all of those people. That's why I say you could do it if you get ranked choice, because all of a sudden people say, okay, I'm going to rank these people. And I don't have to worry about that. That's to me, that's the key. If you want to break the duopoly up, you need ranked choice voting everywhere.
That
Um,
yeah, Brian, that's a great point, and that's the dilemma that people like me have faced in this never Trumpers like me.
yeah,
I left the Republican Party. I'm never going back. It is what it is. So I had a choice, and I became a Democrat to stop what my former party is. Um, I'm still a very conservative Democrat, but again, higher, more important
But
issues.
Joe, I would say that we need you in the Democratic Party, and we need, liberals in the Republican Party. One reason we've gotten
Yeah,
this way
yeah,
is you go back to the middle of the 20th century, and I don't want to give you a hagiography of it because a lot of what we had helped contribute to the fact that it took till 1964 and 1965 to pass the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. There were problems, but by having both parties span the ideological spectrum, it lower the temperature on politics because you had people who were either inclined to help their party or people in the other party who were inclined to cut deals because they agreed ideologically with the party.
yeah,
And it helped create a more functional system. The other thing is, in so much as primaries are the most important, people like you help people like me keep my party sane,
yeah.
and keep the Democrats from going nuts in the way that the Republicans had. So, and that's the other problem with, a third party is if people start flaking off, if the most moderate people
Right,
flake off of each party, now all of a sudden you're making those two parties more extreme. And maybe you can pick off an election here or there, but how do you build that up? You remember the one time we had this kind of substitution in the 1850s, it was because the Whig Party disintegrated. It was
right,
falling apart.
right.
And that was the key factor there. The other time that we came maybe the closest would have been Teddy Roosevelt and the Progressive Party. And even with the former president behind it, it fell apart really quickly. Some of that was he died, but he then got back in the Republican fold really quickly. Those
Right.
partisan ties, there's political science research that shows that our partisan identities have become yoked to our religious identities, our local identities, by which I mean rural, urban, your how you
Yeah,
feel about the place. And as all those identities come together in one, your party becomes a huge part of who you are. When somebody's
yeah.
insulting your party, now they're insulting you. It's a team sport. It becomes a team sport.
No, no, you're so right, Brian. If a guy like me wants to run again, oh, I'll run for president as an independent, or I'll run to go back to the House as an independent. I've got to be cognizant to what you just said. I don't want to help the Republican win if I did do that. So if I want to run, I have to become a Democrat. But Brian, again, I'm older than you, but you and I both remember where that when there was this unusual animal called the Southern fucking Democrat,
Yeah.
a conservative Democrat down there. The Democratic Party used to have that thing.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, if you look at the ideology that Trump has, I mentioned George Wallace before, but a lot of it comes from the Southern Democrats. There was a
Yeah,
fight in the 80s between Ronald Reagan and Southern conservatives in both parties over trade and protectionism because they were all protectionists.
yeah,
Take care of the local industry. They always were in favor of government spending that benefited their places. He, in a lot of ways, is kind of the heir to the Southern Democrats, but they used to, into the 80s and even 90s, they existed. And you had what they used to call gypsy moths, the
right.
Northeastern and Upper Midwestern and some West Coast liberal Republicans.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, my senators were John Hines and Arlen Specter in Pennsylvania. Specter ended his career as a Democrat.
As a Democrat.
Hines ran, I did a paper in college on Hines's first Senate campaign. It was a race to the left. Who was the bigger liberal? Him
Yeah,
or Bill Green, who was a Democrat congressman. And those kinds of people thought if Hines hadn't been tragically killed that he was going to be president
right.
because he had a lot of money. We had movie star good looks. But that was how the system was when he died in 1991. And pretty quickly thereafter, it would have become an impossibility.
So so I became a Democrat 5 months ago. Um, uh, and I said at the time, and I did because I believe my former party's a threat to democracy, the rule of law. I legit believe that. I want to beat them. But I said at the time, Brian, and I still say, though it's been a roller coaster, but I say that the party needs to be a tent, the Democratic Party, a big enough tent to hold Zoran Mamdani and Joe Walsh. Do you agree with that, or is a tent that big meaningless?
It has to be. First of all,
Hmm.
I come at this from being a diehard sports fan, Joe. You know what I like the most? I like to
What?
win. It was ugly last night, but my Eagles won. And that's
Yeah,
all that matters at the end of the day. And the bigger 10 party wins. I
yeah,
want a party that can win in every place. And you can't have that. I am trying desperately to explain to people Zoran Mondani does not win in most of America.
right.
He is fine in a big city. That ideology plays in a very liberal big city like New York, especially when you're running against a corrupt sleazeball who everybody hates.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
helps. If you're trying to win an election, that's the first thing. You want an opponent like that. Okay. But he doesn't win in South Carolina. He doesn't win in Pennsylvania. He doesn't win in Montana. And we need to be a geographically big party to make that happen.
Why did Brian? I agree. I've said this a lot on TV. It's like the party forgot that we're a politically diverse place geographically, and the party seemed to just all tie onto this national brand and try to apply it everywhere. Does that make sense?
Well, I think what happened, Joe, was you go back to the Obama years when they had 60 senators. They had Ben Nelson from Nebraska. So I just did an
Yeah.
event with Joe Biden the other day. I wasn't aware he was still living, but he introduced Biden at an event at a local dinner. But like you had Max Baucus, John Tester from Montana. I'm old enough to remember Kent Conrad and Byron
Yeah.
Dorgan getting 60% of the vote in North Dakota, even as George W. Bush got 60% of the vote.
Yeah.
And as all those people lost or retired, and my favorite example, Mark Pryor from
Yeah.
Arkansas,
Arkansas.
he was the son of a senator. He was state
Yeah.
attorney general, beat an incumbent senator in 2002, ran unopposed in 2008, and then lost by 20 points in 2014 because no Democrat could win in Arkansas anymore. As those people lost, the center of gravity in the party moved leftward. All of a sudden, the rightmost flank of the party was gone.
Yeah.
And all you had were people to the left. And again, primaries. Democrats have done a generally better job than Republicans of saying, hey, we want to win. We're not going to nominate someone who's a numbskull who can't win or
Right.
someone who's fucking insane. We're talking Herschel Walker, Carrie Lake, people like that, but primaries matter. Well, when 12% of the most ideological voters are the people voting, then
Right.
all of a sudden you want to move to the left. I also think it's true that younger voters are more
Yeah.
liberal than older voters. So there's this idea of how do we appeal to them? They're coming into the electorate, and they're also the ones staffing things. You know,
S-
re-
s-
that has an
So,
effect.
and by the way, everybody joining us, I think you can tell by now why I love to talk to Brian Rosenwald. Make sure you follow and subscribe to him on Substack. Brian Rosenwald. Everybody who's subscribed to me, subscribe to Brian. You will not at all regret it. Um, Brian, what what then for the Democratic Party, my new political party? Because as horrible as Trump is, he's the very thing our founders feared. Damn it, he won again. And that says my new party's got real issues and problems. What does the Democratic Party need to do to get their act together?
First of all, we have to recognize that there is one thing that ties together Zoran Mondani, Mikey Sherrill, Abigail Spanberger, and that's that they ran on issues that affect people, the cost of living, how to make their life better and easier. And I do think I forget who I saw. So, apologies if you happen to be out there if I'm taking your idea, but I saw somebody say, part of our problem is Kamala Harris did win on affordability or did run on affordability, but she did it with a laundry list of policies. And when you give
Mm,
people everything, if you have 45 minutes of policy proposals, they hear nothing. And so I think that we need a simpler message. This is not a white paper. We are going to fight to lower the cost of groceries. We're going to fight to lower the cost of housing. Bullet points. You need one signature thing. What did Barack Obama run on? I am going to give you better health care, healthcare for all Americans. It was one issue that was his signature. You need that. I think the second thing is we need to understand that the leftists are trying to drive us into a ditch as a party. That this main primary is absurd. Graham Plattner puts a seat at risk. I don't like how old Janet Mills is, but she's a proven commodity. She has no skeletons in the closet. She's run for governor and been elected twice. Somebody like that, or I'll go to the Michigan Senate race. Al Sayed, the Bernie guy who is in the
yeah.
primary, he can't win. The other two Democrats can. You have to have common sense.
So you know what's funny, Brian? You know what's funny? I believe that this is analogous to the Tea Party and the
Yeah,
Republican Party a while back. And in general, I'm still a Tea Party guy, and I'll defend it till the cows come home. And it was an anti-establishment movement. I think what the Democrats are doing now is beginning their own Tea Party movement, anti-establishment. But to your point, Brian, the one bad aspect of that is you get a lot of flawed bad candidates. Um, but I wonder, because the Democratic base, Brian, is so pissed off, guys like Plattner, it may not matter what anybody does or says.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that scares me about our politics is I can't assure you that Graham Plattner will lose. There was a time I could assure you that a politician with baggage was a loser. In both parties, they were done. They were going to lose. Now, I'm not so
Post
sure about
Trump,
that. You know,
forget about it, Brian.
let me actually make a bold statement. About 8 years ago, next month, we had a special election in Alabama for Senate, and Roy Moore lost by a
Yeah,
very narrow margin because he was a pedophile, basically, or at
yeah,
least I probably shouldn't say that because I'm sure there's legal ramifications, but there
close
were
enough.
accusations of that, flirting around. Okay, and he lost. I don't think he would lose in 2025. I think that we have become so team sport oriented that even a guy like that can win, and that's bad for the system. I do think the Democratic establishment has to wake up, Joe. I understand that they were probably not going to get the ACA subsidies extended, even if they kept the government shut down for another 3, 4, 5 weeks. But first of all, Donald Trump was paying a price for this politically, and it was going to
Yeah,
get worse this week with airports grounded and people in line at food banks. It was going to get worse. Secondly, you have to understand that your base wants you to fight, and there is
yeah,
only one piece of leverage that Democrats have, and that's funding the government. Anybody else who tells you that Democrats can stop Trump on anything else or in any other context is lying to you now. If you're out there and they said, well, why didn't you stop Trump doing this? Why didn't you stop Trump doing that? The minority party in Congress is pretty much worthless in terms of getting anything done outside of the fact that you need 8 members of that party or 7 members of that party to get you to 60 in the Senate to pass a funding bill. This is the only leverage. And they rolled over. I couldn't even get on Substack on Monday and say, look, at least we won the fight over when the next CR is going to expire. We got a December date, so we have leverage. They rolled over on everything. And because the people who rolled over were moderates, now everybody says, well, the moderate wing is the surrender wing. I don't want to vote for these people. When in reality, most moderates opposed what they were doing.
yeah, yeah,
And look, it was a bad situation. People were suffering. It was not something I don't like shutting the government down. I've never supported a government shutdown before this. I believe in functional governance. And by the way, the other thing Democrats have to do better, Joe, is they have to govern better. I'm talking about state and local Democrats not doing crackpotty things like trying to get rid of gifted education,
yeah.
that people understand that affect their lives, not letting criminals who have rap sheets as long as my arm out on the streets. Things that the people notice. And
Preach,
like
brother, preach.
and let's get buildings built. Let's not tie them up because you're worried about the spotted owl or some, environmental, endangered species where it's $3 million of litigation in 10 years to build anything. That's why our housing is so expensive, or one of the reasons. And also, let's get rid of NIMBYs. There are so many people. You go back to liberals in the 70s trying to diversify the suburbs, where
Yeah.
people would say, well, I support diversity, but if you put an apartment building in there, it's going to cost me more in taxes, or it's going to make my neighborhood less safe, or it's going to drive my property value down. And so I can't support that. Well, you do that away with that. We need cheaper housing in America.
Uh, Bry, I generally think I agree with you. Before the shutdown even became a thing, I said I advise Democrats, don't even engage. Keep the government open. Trump is fucking everything up with his big bad beautiful bill, his tariffs, and his deportations. Let Republicans own all this horrible shit. But if you're gonna get involved in the shutdown fight, then just turn to the Republicans and say, hey, fuck the filibuster. Get rid of it. You guys have enough votes. You keep the government open. Get rid of the filibuster. That's what Democrats should have said at the beginning.
I said this to people August, September. Everybody, the media is confidently saying, you push a shutdown, you're going to lose. I said, we really haven't had a unified government shutdown.
Yeah.
And most Americans pay no attention to politics. All they know is that Donald Trump and the Republicans run things, which means
Boom.
they don't understand the nuances of the filibuster and needing 60 votes. They say, oh, the government shut down. You idiots can't even manage to keep it open.
Yeah.
You're incompetent. And then Trump, I couldn't believe my luck as a Democrat, Joe. He's out there saying, oh, affordability is not an issue. Then
Yeah.
Friday, a federal judge hands the man a gift. Says you must pay out food stamps so you don't look like Ebenezer
I thought,
Scrooge. And what do? They appeal. And then the Supreme Court
yeah,
gives them a stay, and Pam Bondi says, we will fight forever for President Trump's agenda. And I'm like, wait a second. She just admitted that starving people is his agenda. Like, they are the most incompetent messengers you'll ever find. They handed Democrats a huge advantage on this. But I think you're right that the Democrats, they really should just say, Republicans, you govern, you deal with this. You fix the problems, and it's admirable. The irony of this is, what were Democrats fighting for? They were fighting to keep healthcare rates from skyrocketing. Well,
yeah,
who was going to pay for those healthcare rates skyrocketing? Republicans.
yeah,
Democrats were doing this because they thought it was hurting people and they were being genuine. But they were going to help the Republicans politically.
yeah.
And I think,
It,
you have to play
yeah.
hardball, but you have to fight smart. You can't go into any cul-de-sacs where you can't win at all. You can't get any concessions, and it's time for the establishment to kind of wake up to the fact that first of all, we need younger people who can communicate better. I love Chuck Schumer, but any attempt he makes to communicate these days is cringy,
I
in
don't
so many
love Chuck
ways.
Schumer, and I agree with what you said about how cringy he is, Brian. And we're going to do this again because I so enjoy it. But I want to close with just two bigger picture questions. The Republican Party, my former party, I believe for the rest of my life, it's basically a MAGA adjacent party. I don't think it'll change. Forecast the next 20 years in that Republican Party.
Well, it's interesting. I have an event on campus tomorrow on sort of populist conservatism, and one of the questions is, where does it go from here? I think that that is right, except that they really haven't articulated a coherent agenda. What is really going on? Like,
Mhm.
if you look at Josh Hawley, who I think is the most pure MAGA politician, he said all summer, guys, why are we cutting Medicaid? That's our own
Right.
voting base. You're hurting them. Well, that viewpoint lost out. And he's done this over and over again because what you really have is Reaganites still, who may try to
Mhm.
sound like MAGAites, but there's no articulated MAGA philosophy because, as Donald Trump told Laura Ingraham last night on Fox, I am MAGA. And he has no ideology, he has no agenda. So, unless and until they get an agenda, it's going to be hard to hold the party because you just have a bunch of weather vanes, Joe. You have people like Marco Rubio, spineless
Yeah.
weather vanes who are going to go wherever they think it is politically advantageous to go. JD Vance, people like that. And, what does it even stand for except owning the libs, except making people like you and me mad? That's really where it's going. Now, I think the Reaganites who think, oh, Trump will exit stage left and we'll get our party back are
No
delusional.
way. Fuck no.
They're
Yeah.
not going to win elections. You're going to win elections by hugging Donald Trump, hugging
Yeah.
populism, and that kind of thing. But I think that for it to really become an effective force, for it to control a party, you look at when conservatives took over the GOP from the moderate kind of Eisenhower Ford kind of wing of the party. They did it because they had an agenda, an agenda that boiled down to like 8 words: family values, low taxes,
Yeah.
less government, strong defense. Eight
Defense.
words. You need to be able to distill a MAGA thing down to eight
Yeah.
words if you're going to control one of our major political parties. And so I think that they've got to figure that out. I don't think the Reaganites are going to ever regain power
No.
in this coalition. But what they may do is continue to control when the GOP governs what actually gets done. In
Give
so much as they're still the leaders and things.
then do the same with my new political party. What do the next 10 to 20 years look like?
Well, the Democratic Party's got a choice here. They've been blessed by winning a lot of elections in swing states in recent years, which means they have a deep bench of people who have a proven record of winning in Pennsylvania, Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, the places that determine who the president is. And if they nominate someone like that in 2028, that person's got a good shot of winning. If they go to the left or they go for someone like, Newsom, who has a lot of liberal baggage of things that he signed in California that can be caricatured. And let's be honest, people look at Illinois, California,
Yeah.
Massachusetts, and they say
Yeah.
far out leftist loony. It's part of what hurt Harris. If they nominate someone like that, it's going to be a much more touch and go. And the other thing that Democrats are going to have to remember is, if we do not become a more geographically diverse
Yeah.
party
Yeah.
after 2028, we're never going to win the presidency again. Unless we
Yeah.
get a trifecta and do a lot of hardball things like DC statehood, Puerto Rico statehood, split California into two, things like that, because the electoral college is such that we're going to no longer be able to just win the three blue wall states, Pennsylvania,
Right.
Michigan,
Right.
and Wisconsin, and win the presidency as of 2032. And the House seats are shifting,
Yeah.
southward. Because
Yeah.
as we were talking about when we got started, people hate cold weather. They
Yeah.
want to go live where it's warm, and the Republicans control those places. So we've
Uh,
got to compete in more places, or we're going to be a minority party going forward.
Oh man, Brian, preach, my brother, and I hope every Democrat listening to us right now is taking in what you're saying. Brian Rosenwald, everybody, please do me a favor and follow him and subscribe to him here on Substack. A political and a media historian at the University of Pennsylvania. I just thoroughly enjoy speaking with him. Brian, my friend, we shall do this again. Thank you, brother.
Absolutely, Joe. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks, man. Thanks,
All right, take
everybody.
care.
Be brave.
Thank you for listening. Remember to listen, share, and follow The Social Contract with Joe Walsh on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere great podcasts are found. And be sure to leave a 5-star review. This has been The Social Contract with Joe Walsh.